Welcome to the Leaders Cafe, where leaders discuss the latest trends and issues in leadership, team building, and the future of organizations. Each week, we'll bring you engaging conversations with successful leaders who will share their insights, experiences, and strategies for creating effective teams, navigating change, and driving innovation. So sit back, relax, and join us for a virtual cup of coffee at the Leaders Cafe.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine world. And today, we're going to get into agile leadership and more. And I'm really excited about this. And of course, I got my cup of coffee here, and I have a good friend from, well, you'll see he's from the other side. And I'll have to ask Mike if he drinks coffee or tea in the morning. So we'll see. Mike, welcome to the show.
Here's my coffee. It's right here.
So it's coffee, not tea? You've
coffee, yes, indeed.
Okay. So, man. So it's been a while. It's great to see you again.
Yeah.
So
it's good to be here. I'm excited to be here. I love hanging out with people who are experiencing the agility challenge in the real world. I call them everyday agile leaders in the real world. So I'm excited to talk about that, Todd.
Just to kind of bring people up to speed, how did you get into agile leadership, and really what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I'm English originally, American now, as you can tell from my sort of mid-Atlantic accent. I've been here 25 years actually in January. So wow, gosh, where did 25 years go? In my 20s, I started out in the oil and gas business. I joined Shell out of college. Moved to Holland, where I lived for 5 years, and Shell had a great graduate, training program where they put you through boot camp for 6 months, and then they put you out in the field for 2 years. And so I worked on onshore and offshore oil and gas drilling rigs as the one of two company personnel on site at any one time. The number one guy is called the tool pusher, and the number two guy is called the petroleum engineer, which is what I was. And, it's week on, week off. When you're offshore, it's helicopter out, helicopter back. And when you're on 24/7. You sleep if and when you can. You know the score,
right?
In the field of emergency management. I didn't use the language back then, Todd, but now, 40 years later, I realize so clearly how that's where I learned agility and how to be an agile leadership presence, not a fragile leadership presence, because you don't last very long on an offshore drilling rig. If you're a fragile leadership presence, I would be fired real fast. I'd be brought in and found a desk job real fast,
right?
If not fired. And then I went from there. I pivoted, via the classic thing in the 80s of an MBA, and I got into the aerospace business. And initially as a program manager, as a product support manager, as a commercial manager, then as a sales and marketing VP, then as a CEO, then as a divisional CEO of a British public company that probably nobody's ever heard of called Spirent. I ran the aerospace division, and we did a collection of very high technology, hardware and software, systems integration in the field of what became called FOQA, F-O-Q-A, Flight Operations Quality Assurance. In other words, flight safety. And we did everything from black boxes to engine instrument displays to FOQA software systems, looking for events, incidents, et cetera, et cetera. And I suppose that just further ingrained in me some of the concepts and ideas around agility. I'm intimately familiar with fly-by-wire systems and not least of all for fighter planes and all of that. And I love to talk about, the design of a fighter plane is one of the most agile things you can think of.
Right.
So I use that a lot. I talk about the training of fighter pilots with the OODA loop and all of that good stuff. And then I went independent 20 years ago. I'd come to the States, and then 9/11 happened, and the markets crashed, and our corporate share price was in the doldrums. And I was very lucky in that I got my green card 2 months before 9/11.
Wow.
So I had options. I was here in Southern California, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to go independent, and I'm going to follow my passion, which is all about leadership, teamwork, taking teams and organizations on breakthrough journeys. We're going to go climb a big mountain together. And what I quickly realized, back in 2002, 3, 4, of course, the whole concept of Agile was exploding, not least of all from the field of Agile software development. I was coming at it more from having been a CEO. I had this huge sense of void. I'd done a lot of training, got an MBA. I'd worked with Dale Carnegie forever in my businesses, but I just had a sense of void. There's something missing here, that it's not clicking like it needs to. And it was really, really challenging to be a leader of a very entrepreneurial division inside of a public share price company that's share price sensitive. I felt like I lived in that vice, that pressure cooker. I've got to serve two masters simultaneously. And so I had this huge sense of void, and I was determined to fill it. And so I gradually crystallized what I came to call an agility operating system and frameworks around agile leadership. And that's been my work for the last 20 years, Todd, and I love it.
That's awesome. I love that journey. And I ask that question a lot because I think, especially with students, they think that, you graduate from college and boom, you're at your pinnacle of your career, and they get confused and upset. Like, why aren't I here? Like, why aren't, it's like, okay, you're going to get there. Right. There's a journey that you have to go on, and we all do. A couple of things that I find really interesting about some of the stuff that you're doing, especially with the agile leadership, is it's applied across disciplines. It's not just a business thing. It isn't just a public safety thing. It isn't just, it's really anything that you do. If you're nonprofit or the CEO of a Fortune, 200 company, right? You're gonna want to use this stuff. And like, I remember back in the 90s, maybe, or 80s, old, when Jack Walsh wrote his book on GE. And just to kind of let you know, where I grew up, there are 2 jobs or 3 realistically that most people had in the town I lived in. You either work for the state of New York, you worked for Owens Corning, or you work for General Electric.
Right.
And that was kind of it. So it's up in upstate New York. And so GE was kind of one of those things. And he really brought the concept of agile leadership, even though maybe he might have been using those words, but to GE. What lessons can you apply to any business, but like a daily work as far as like being an agile leader? What does that truly mean to somebody who wants to embrace that concept?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, indeed. So, I got into the aerospace business in 1990, and I was in it for, 12 years. And of course, during the 90s, indeed, was when, GE and Motorola and all of these sort of, big leading edge high-tech manufacturing and design and development companies, not least of all in aerospace, but also automotive, of course, with Toyota and all that good stuff, really got their arms around what we might ultimately all put in the bucket called lean, right? Total quality management, statistical process control, Six Sigma, lean, you name it. You can kind of put all of that in that bucket, right? And then, in that same period of time, and then with the Agile Software Development Manifesto that got released in 2001, the Agile world, the software world, woke up to the idea that we need to go Agile, and for the last 20 years did.
Right.
And progressively during the last 20 years, the whole lean world realized, oh, shoot, lean isn't enough. We also need to go agile. And so what you've seen is that all enterprises now, big, small, high-tech, low-tech, for-profit, non-for-profit, local, global, it doesn't matter. Product, service, experience, it doesn't matter. Every business on the planet now is trying to figure out how to go agile, not just lean. Now, actually, if you're a purist and you look inside.
Oh no, we just lost Mike, and but we'll continue here. I'm sure he'll pop back in. So anyway, when you start looking at the concepts of agile leadership, I think it's realistically inside the terminology, right? And Mike has been doing some really interesting work when it comes to agile leadership. Here, he's back. There you are. You're
I
back.
don't know what happened there.
That's okay. That's all right. I stretched a little bit, and I
didn't lose any Wi-Fi or anything. So I'm not sure what happened there. Anyway, do you want me to just carry on?
Yeah, just carry on. So I was just saying, I was just kind of going, I was sort of trying to stretch into the area. So the idea of applying that agile leadership, and you said you're talking about lean and how lean. So if you
look inside of the body of wisdom called lean, actually all of the seeds of agile exist inside that body of wisdom. So it's almost like we've reached inside, we've grabbed the agile bits, and we've turned the whole body of wisdom inside out. And so it's the same body of wisdom, but we're now looking at it through an agile lens, not just a lean lens. And so agile, of course, is really about being a lot more fast cycle, high frequency, high cadence, revved up, smaller OODA loop, smaller clock, faster clock speed, smaller loop of leadership and management. And essentially, embracing failure, smart failure, not dumb failure, not stupid failure, not what the heck were you thinking failure, right? Smart failure, because as we know, if it's smart failure, it's not failure at all, it's learning. Now, it has to be cheap, has to be fast failure. So fail early, fail often, fail cheaply.
Right.
Like Jim Collins said, fire bullets, not cannonballs. Don't spend, months and months and months, polishing up some cannonball, and sinking costs into that cannonball like you can't believe. And then you fire that thing and miss. Oh my gosh, you're in trouble now.
Right.
Fire a bullet, adjust, fire a bullet, adjust, fire a bullet. We hit the bullseye. Okay, now fire a cannonball. So it's that kind of idea. And exactly what you've just said. I would challenge anybody that's listening to this, that is in any industry, in any function, in any field. If you Google a plain English phrase, business phrase of your function, your industry, your business, and then you stick the word agile in front of it, you'll be buried. Because somebody in your sector is blazing the trail with agile. Agile marketing, agile HR, agile finance, agile budgeting, agile strategy, execution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I live here in a wine district that you probably know well, Temecula Valley, wine district, about 100 miles maybe from where you are. And even wineries are experimenting with how to go agile. And so what I like to talk about, Todd, is for our leaders who are listening, is what does it take for you to walk in the door every day, every meeting, every moment as an agile leadership presence, not a fragile leadership presence. And we all know it when we see it, don't we?
Yeah.
We all know when it passes the smell test and when it does not. And you in your field, we were just talking about the fact before we started here, everybody, that whether it's emergency management or petroleum engineer on offshore drilling rigs, or a commercial pilot or a fighter pilot or a special forces or an ER doctor or a surgeon or a professional sports person for that matter, all of those people I call everyday agile leaders in the real world. And what I love to do is to study their secrets and then translate them into business terms, and then facilitate leaders to be able to get into the same mode in their business as those people in the real world. And we were just talking about the fact that in the real world, you get found out real fast.
Yeah.
Whether you're an agile leadership presence or a fragile leadership presence is about to become black and white, crystal clear moments from now, maybe seconds, maybe minutes, maybe hours, maybe days. And the problem in business is that there's often a much bigger separation between cause and effect of when you ultimately get found out. Well, were you an agile leadership presence or were you a fragile leadership presence? And of course, you just brought up GE, and GE's share price is in the absolute doldrums right now, because it took 5, 10, 15, 20 years from the high point of Jack Welch to now it become black and white that GE is at a low point. And that didn't just happen yesterday. It didn't just happen last week, last year. It didn't just happen during Jeff Immelt's tenure and the CEOs they've had since. The seeds of all of that were sown a long time ago.
Yeah, I not to get on this GE rant, but I think it's interesting you say that. People, I was listening to some people that are smarter than me when it comes to business, and they're talking about the fact that some of the stuff that happened with GE, the failures that are happening now, were sown back when Jack Welch was the CEO. Yeah. Some of the decisions that he made and investments that they made have come back to really not be as shiny as they looked back then.
Yeah, because there are essentially dark corners of conversation that you're not having fully. I over the last 20 years, Todd, as we were talking, the whole field of agile everything has just exploded, and consequently everybody now has an agility practice. All of the big consulting houses have agility practices, and they push out books and articles and research, you name it. All of the training companies have put a fresh paint job on their traditional stuff, to sort of frame it in agility. So we've had this exploding universe of agility inspiration. And what I've tried to do is to connect back with, 40 years of doing this and really sort of cut through the complexity and the hype. And where I got to was this. I got to the concept that I call C2C, conversation flow to cash flow. And what I love to do is I love to stand in front of an audience and I love to challenge them with this. And I say, we used to say cash flow is king. I said, not anymore, it's not. GE used to have a boatload of cash.
Yeah.
BlackBerry used to have a boatload of cash. Blockbuster, Kodak, all the classic examples used to have boatloads of cash. So if cash was king, they'd still have a boatload of cash. In fact, they'd have a bigger one.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't. In fact, they've gone the opposite way. So how come? Well, what I suggest is that you can trace it back to what I call conversation flow. Now, at that point, I have to unpack it a little bit and explain to people, I don't mean we just sit around and talk. We don't just do what we're doing right now. I talk about conversation flow is four things at a microscopic level: individual thoughts, questions, decisions, and actions. And that action piece opens the door to the agile mindset, because agile leaders understand that agility is a contact sport. Until you take a real action that really connects with reality, real people start using your real product and giving you real feedback that you really listen to and really work with. Until you contact reality, it's all theory. It's all theory. And if you're not contacting reality because you're busy back here polishing up your cannonball, right? You're in for a rude awakening when you finally fire that thing, which is why fire a bullet to run a small experiment to contact reality. So I have to unpack it all, but essentially I bring it back to the idea that conversation flow to cash flow, where the trajectory of your conversation flow goes, the trajectory of your cash flow follows. So if your cash flow has done that, like GE's, it's because their conversation flow did that. And so you can trace it back and you can begin to realize, oh, there were some dark corners of conversation flow they just weren't having back then. Some elephants in the corner of the room they just weren't talking about. They weren't discussable things.
Mm.
Jack. No, this isn't a rant against Jack Welch. He was in his era. He was an icon,
right?
And that isn't necessarily agile leadership in all of its forms, right? Because it can make some things undiscussable. and they're lurking there. And if you don't catch them, they're going to come and bite you in the rear. And we've all had that. We've all had that, haven't we? We've all had those 2020, moments of hindsight where we realize, oh, shoot, what were we thinking? Or rather, what were we not thinking? We got 99 things right, and one thing wrong came and bit us in the rear, and down that initiative, that project, that product, that launch, whatever it was. Hopefully it is a sufficiently small thing, not a big thing that takes down the whole thing. But indeed, this is what I suggest often goes wrong. There's elements of the conversation flow that we aren't having with a sufficient cadence, with a sufficient quantity, with a sufficient quality to keep our trajectory of conversation flow like this, so that the trajectory of our cash flow can follow it.
So how do you apply that to public policy? Because I mean, obviously, we're not directly worried about cash flow, but we definitely want to make good decisions that are going to that are impacting the community that we work for. Or if you're like in a private, if you're in a nonprofit, nonprofit still wants to have cash flow, but how do you apply that there?
Yeah, in the area of public policy or not-for-profits, I would substitute a different C than cash flow. Community impact, community support, compassionate leadership, if you're in the field of healthcare and things like that. So absolutely. And by the way, of course, even in all of the hardcore business work that I do, the conversation flow has to be about multiple bottom lines. It has to be about purpose, not just profit. It has to be about passion, because those are the things, purpose and passion and other things, meaning rather than just money. Those are the things from which true leadership, emerges, and true followership emerges. And so there's got to be a duality of those things as an and proposition. And of course, in public policy or not-for-profits, of course, even more so, you still got to still got to live within your budgets, right?
Yeah,
when we're precise, right? We don't say non-profits, we say not-for-profits.
Right.
They've still got to be profitable. They've still got to have an excess. They can't lose money, because they'll lose the belief of their donors and funders and boards and leaders. So I couldn't agree more with you. I would substitute a different C for the second C, conversation flow, to community impact or something else like that. Absolutely.
And I think that's critical, because like when we think about the leaders, and keep talking about Jack Welch, because I feel bad, because there's probably like some young people that are listening to this going,
who's that?
And in Jim Collins' book From Good to Great, he talks about the it doesn't use these words, these are my words, not Jim Collins' words, the idea of the celebrity CEO, right?
Yeah.
And we could add like Elon Musk in there today, or whatever CEO that you're thinking of, Bezos, if he's still a CEO, you had those type of those big name business leaders as this, and their personality, they walk into the room, they're going to command the room. No one's going to tell them the truth. They're going to get a lot of yeses to whatever they say. And he could, and this is how I feel really bad now, because I forget the guy's name, but he contrasts that celebrity CEO to this guy who comes in, runs a company. When he retires, he already has his successor ready to go, and the company thrives and still is is working today. And he built this thing from the ground up. Yeah, I forget his name. I apologize. I have to look this up. I have the book right behind me. I suppose I can flip through it. But the concept here is, what do you leave behind you?
Exactly.
Right. And do you leave a company who can or an organization that can thrive without you? And I believe that if you could do that, you're a better leader than you are when you leave, the company falls apart.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's almost one of Jim Collins's previous ideas of are you building to last, or are you building to flip, as it were?
Right.
And yeah, in Good to Great, and then Great by Choice, Jim Collins talks about level 5 leadership, right, which is a paradoxical blend. So there's an and proposition right there, a paradoxical blend of professional willpower and personal humility. And so we're really talking about that duality again, right? We are talking about purpose and passion and profit and meaning and all of those kinds of things. And couldn't agree more with you with leaders who leave big footprints and big fingerprints that have a lasting effect. And one of my favorites, and we just published an ebook about this with a chapter in there about this CEO, and he reviewed it for us, is Alan Mulally, who was the former CEO of Ford, and before that Boeing. And I never met him in my aerospace days. He would never have heard of me, but he would have heard of my company and my systems, because Alan Mulally was the program director of the 777, still one of the most successful and safest commercial airliners ever. And we had big contracts on the 777 with actuation systems and fly-by-wire elements for the leading edge slats and the trailing edge flaps that give the wing higher lift during takeoff and landing. And then, so I took a great interest in Alan Mulally, and he had this whole concept called his working together leadership and management system. And he then, of course, gets headhunted over to become the CEO of Ford, I think from 2006 to 2014, if my memory serves me correctly. And on the way in, Ford had record losses. Its share price was in the absolute doldrums. It was teetering on the edge of going bankrupt, just like all the other automotive big players who ultimately get dragged in front of Congress, if you remember those days. The other guys take the government money and go bankrupt as well. Well, Alan Mulally, in his first phase of being in Ford, he had the foresight, there we go, foresight versus hindsight. He had the foresight to basically remortgage the company, have a war chest of money before all hell broke loose. He was in Congress. He was there supporting the other guys, and he was being challenged by, some congressman. Mr. Mulally, why are you here asking for government money? And he answered, I'm not.
Right.
I'm just here supporting these guys. And anyway, he pulled off one of the most transformative, lasting corporate turnarounds ever, and mentored his successor, a guy called Mark Fields. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out. And 3 years later, after becoming his successor in 2014, when Alan Mulally left Ford, Mark Fields hadn't been that successful, actually. And I think in 2017, Mark Fields had a parting of ways with Ford. But now, Ford is on a better trajectory, not least of all with its EV strategy and Lightning truck and all of that good stuff. But I reached out to Alan Mulally when I started doing all of this work, and I wrote my first book in 2011 called Wheelspin, and the Agile Executives Manifesto. And I sent a copy to Alan Mulally, and so gradually, progressively, nurtured a relationship with him, where eventually in 2017, so it was after he left Ford, Alan Mulally came and spent the afternoon with me on one of my peer forums in San Diego. There's just like 18 of us in the room, including Alan Mulally. And I then got to go up and spend a Sunday afternoon with him at his house in Seattle, sat around his kitchen table comparing notes. And then as we wanted to write this ebook that we've just published, we wrote a chapter about how Alan Mulally pulled off one of the most agile, transformative, cultural, peer-powered shifts of a big corporate ever. And we wrote the chapter, which he reviewed for us and gave us the thumbs up. And then we put a cover quote on the front cover. And he's a great example of an agile leadership presence with a positive legacy of footprints and fingerprints that he left. Leaving a company in better shape, when he left than he did when he came. Now, that doesn't guarantee a company's future, of course. We could diagnose perhaps some of the things that Mark Fields undid in his tenure. And of course, all this was written about in the book, American Icon, I think the subtitle is How Alan Mulally Saved Ford or something like that. I forget the author's name, but you can find that easily. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Todd. It's all about being the right kind of leader. And that is getting increasingly difficult these days because of the speed of business, the pace of change, the accelerating disruptive environment that we live in. And by the way, everybody, the pundits that I read tell us that's only going to get worse, probably bigger, faster, sooner than you think. One of the authors wrote a great book called The Exponential Age. And because of the convergence of a number of technologies, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, 3D printing, you name it, we're about to see the curve just go exponential in a way that we can't comprehend. We think this is fast. This is about to be redefined as slow.
Mike, we're coming to the end of our show today, and I'd love to talk to you more about this. I think I could talk to you forever about it. But a couple things coming up. One is I just put up your website. It's MikeRichardson.live, and if you guys want to learn more about what Mike is doing, go check this out. And then you and I, we're going to be doing a live event in Irvine here.
Yes, we are. Looking forward to that.
So if you guys want to come, see Mike live, we're going to have an intimate, really small group of people to sit around, have a conversation with Mike, have some dinner, have a couple of cocktails and network. And so more information on that event will be coming up. And Mike, I'm looking forward to that. And it's always, great. What do you think the people are going to get out of when we talk about this live, when we have our live event?
Well, there's nothing more, everybody, that I love to do. I've been doing it for 20 years, than to get peers in a room, shut the door, and hang it all at the door, right? Hang the ego, the armor, the thick skin at the door. Come on in and be fully you. And let's have a real conversation about the real challenges, the real issues, the real problems, the real opportunities that are testing your agility like never before, and help people find deeper reserves of leadership that they can bring to the surface and frame up and lean forwards as truly an agile leadership presence. And so there's no better place I love to be, Todd, than in a place like that. So thanks for making that happen.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. And everybody would love to have you here. Mike, I'm going to give you the last word there to say goodbye to everybody. And oh wait, look at this little. Thanks, Janet. The last word to say goodbye to everybody, and what you think people can get out of agile leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks so much, Todd, for having me. And everybody, I just gave a keynote in San Diego a couple of weeks ago to our community of peers. Peer forum members in San Diego, and I was inviting them to begin what I call a 5-level reset. Whatever level of leadership, communication, teamwork you think you are at, and perhaps you have made your way to that fifth level that Jim Collins talks about, level 5 leadership. And what I'm suggesting to everybody is that in this exponential age, things are about to get progressively reset, probably bigger, faster, sooner than you think, and possibly even faster, sooner, bigger than your worst nightmare. And so how do you sort of say, well, actually level 5 just became level 1, and there are now 4 other levels I need to get back to. And peer power, culture, agility are the first 3. An advisory advantage. How do you're going to need more and more and more external input to your business, because you just can't possibly keep up anymore. You can't possibly expect to have all of the expertise you need in-house. And then the top level is what I call an intelligence advantage. In the world of artificial intelligence, and how do you get that to come together with your human intelligence and put that together as collective intelligence? How are you going to develop an intelligence advantage, which is the new battleground? And the agility piece is kind of the middle piece of all of that. If you don't have the agility to be able to do that, you're going to get wheel spin in there. It's going to be like an oil slick, right? You just can't get traction.
Right.
And so if you do have the agility, then you can get traction in there, and you can be on a great trajectory to a bright future. Go onwards and upwards, everybody, and be agile. Look forward to seeing you at the event in a few weeks' time.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for your time. Stand by. Hey, everybody, thank you again for spending so much time with us today. It's always a pleasure. And, we want to bring great leaders to you like Mike, and to be able to have great conversations. And I think that's what we have. So, everyone, until next week, stay safe and stay hydrated.